Empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men. Power Black men. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men to live extraordinary lives. Shatter the stereotypes. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men to live extraordinary lives.
Welcome to Shatter the Stereotypes, where the intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. This show is based on the simple idea that every Black man is capable of creating inner peace, dynamic health, great relationships, and financial abundance. Therefore, we provide insights and strategies to educate, motivate, and inspire Black men to reach their full potential and create the life of their dreams. So if you're ready for some high-octane motivation and inspiration that supports and empowers you to live the life you were born to live, get ready to shatter the stereotypes so you can build a life that lights you up and positively impacts the world. So now, let's shatter the stereotypes with your host, Coach Michael Taylor.
Hello and welcome to Shatter the Stereotypes, where my intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. You see, there's never been a shortage of Black male role models. There's only been a lack of exposure of those role models in mainstream media. So my intention is to showcase and highlight Black men who are doing remarkable things in the world. So today we're going to have a conversation about my favorite topic, which is men's work. You see, it is my belief that the greatest challenge we have on the planet is to redefine manhood and masculinity. And the way to do this is to engage in a conversation with men who are committed to supporting men in creating a new paradigm of masculinity. My guest today is doing just that. His name is Mervin Canham, and he is a men's coach, he's a speaker, and the founder of an organization called Holding Space, which is a program that supports and empowers men to embrace new ways of being and relating as men. So it is my absolute honor to welcome Mr. Mervin to the show. Hello, Mervin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, my brother?
Doing fantastic. So before we dive into our conversation, let's start off with a few icebreakers. So first of all, tell us where you're from.
So I'm from South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa. Yeah, that's where I'm from. I come from a township called Eldorado Park. So that's where I'm from. Yeah.
Nice.
Good to be on the show.
Johannesburg, South Africa. Now, name a woman who's inspired you to be the man that you are.
There's so many. There's so many. There's so many. I mean, I look at a woman like Winnie Mandela. You know, her resilience, her passion for the movement, her passion for Black consciousness, um, the difficulties that she went through and the sacrifices she made for this country, to get us to where we are today. I think she's quite underrated, in my judgment. But yeah, she's done a lot for this country. So she's definitely one of the women that inspired me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. She's powerful, definitely powerful woman. Yeah.
Very, very powerful woman. And I agree. I don't think we give her enough credit for, like you said, the sacrifices she made and the support she had, obviously, of her husband and so forth. So nice. So name a man that you look up to and admire.
A man that I look up to. That's a good question. Thank you. There's so many as well. There's so many as well. But I'm just trying to figure out, like, in terms of in my close circles. I look at a guy like who's a part of an organization called the Mankind Project, and his name's Lovuyo Mapetse. And a really, really powerful man. Of course, a man with a lot of integrity, a man I look up to, a man who, when you look at, I guess, typical Xhosa man in South Africa, definitely stretched himself as a man and constantly shows up and does his work. He's a leader, um, and he's a man I follow and have have deep, deep, deep respect for. Um, yeah, but I mean, there's so many black leaders that I look up to. So
And
him
name it
being one
again.
of those.
Say his name again.
Lovuyo Mapete.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Nice.
yeah, yeah,
Nice.
yeah, yeah.
Now, I want you to imagine that you were going to be trapped on an island for 30 days and you could only take one book with you. What book would you take to be on an island to read for 30 days?
I don't read much.
Okay. Okay.
I don't read much. I'm more of a visual person.
All right. So let's
So
let's 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 switch. Do you like movies?
yes, yes,
All right.
definitely,
So name
definitely.
one of your favorite movies.
Um, I guess an inspiring movie, a very inspiring movie would be. I probably look at like The Pursuit of Happiness.
Ah, with Will
Will
Smith.
Smith, Will
Yeah.
Smith, how the role he played in that movie, but also the courage that was displayed in that movie, and how he showed up despite all the odds, and him not giving up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of probably been a part of my journey is that part is not giving up no matter what, and just dress up and show up regardless of the circumstances and what I'm going through in my life. Sometimes I have to just say, it's like this too shall pass. Nothing stays the same. Feelings are not the same. Seasons change. Nothing stays the same. Um, but also, yeah, yeah. It's for me. It's about that. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
When that movie first came out,
yeah.
my son called me on the phone after he watched it. He said, "Dad, that's your story." Because like Will in the movie, going through a lot
Mm,
of adversities, but yet
mm,
having such a deep love for his son, right?
mm,
And just
mm,
really being willing to do whatever it took
mm,
to make sure that his son was okay. I really
mm,
related and resonated with that
mm,
story because my story
mm,
is very, very similar.
mm,
Now,
mm.
let's switch gears just a bit.
Yeah.
We're gonna do some sentence completion. So complete this sentence. I really love to.
I really love to be in a place where men get what they need.
Mm,
Yeah. I really love to be in a place where women do their work and have those profound aha moments. Yeah, yeah.
nice.
It gives me a lot of joy.
My
Yeah.
superpower is.
My superpower is that I've turned my, I guess, my brother's suicide into my superpower. I've turned my brother's suicide into my superpower. Yeah,
Mm,
I've turned that pain. I've turned that pain into power.
mm,
Yeah, yeah.
nice. I am proud of.
Mm. I'm proud of taking the first step into doing what I'm doing. Yeah,
Mm,
and being courageous. And being very courageous. Yes, proud of
and
that.
last but not least, life is.
Life is life is beautiful. Um, Life's a beautiful thing. It depends how I look at it and what I'm here for. So
Mm,
life's beautiful. Yeah,
nice. Now,
and living my purpose, I guess, living my purpose and my mission. Yeah.
mm, That's what makes it beautiful when you're
Yeah,
living your mission and purpose.
yeah,
That
yeah.
definitely adds beauty to
Mm,
it.
mm,
Now, there are some people who are pretty pessimistic about the future in general, while others are
mm.
pretty optimistic about the future in general. Where do you fall on the spectrum between optimism and pessimism for the future in general? Where do you fall?
Well, I guess you're gonna have to explain pessimism, but I am very optimistic. Um, and why I say that is so I'm optimistic in a sense of I just have this feeling in my core that whatever I'm doing, so whatever take, whatever step I take, and whatever I do in terms of holding space and the work I'm doing, I kind of feel like it's so resourced that the the world needs this work, but also the universe keeps on providing, and the universe is slowly just opening up doors. And I feel like that the trajectory is in a good place. So I kind of, yeah, that's the way I feel. I feel like I'm super supported. So that brings up the optimism. I don't know. You're gonna have to explain pessimism.
Mm. Yeah, I think the universe is perfect, and there's no accident that you and I met, and there's no accident that we're having this conversation
Mm,
today.
mm,
So
mm,
I'm in complete agreement that again the universe is supporting us
mm.
in getting this important message and this work out to men
Yeah,
who really need it. So
yeah,
again, I really appreciate you
yeah.
coming on the podcast.
Thank you, and
Now,
thank you for inviting me.
now I wrote a book called The Cure for Onlyness, a Black Man's Guide to Joy, Passion, and Purpose. And in the book, I talk about the unique challenges that we as men of color have when we're in environments where we're the only person of color.
Mm-hmm,
And I'm sure
mm-hmm,
you've had that experience. So
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
how do you navigate being in those types of circumstances?
Just run that by me again. Um,
So again, as men of color,
mhm.
sometimes are put in environments where we're the only person of color in the group. And for some men, that can be really challenging. For some men, it's extremely difficult, but for others, there's no problem. So I'm curious, how do you handle being in environments where you might be the only man of color?
Mm, that's a good question. It's kind of like a lot of the time it's the story of my life. Um, how do I navigate those spaces? I it can become draining. It can become draining because what happens in those spaces, there's a lot of unconscious racism um, that that impacts me, that become draining. Where I'll give you an example. Not so long ago, I was again the only black man in the space, and what happened was I was surrounded by white men, and I was impacted by a white man in the space, and I then had to kind of call out whatever I needed to call out at the time. But I find that becomes draining in terms of having allies, and I know I do have white allies, whatever that means. I mean, we can have a conversation about that. Um, but it does become difficult. It becomes sometimes it comes at a cost of I guess do I become do I keep quiet or do I call it out at the cost of not being liked or impacting someone else? But I guess speaking my truth a lot of the time is helpful, you know, for me to be in integrity with myself, but also you know, being courageous, and part of men's work is being courageous and having uncomfortable conversations with other men. Um, you know, and yeah, it becomes difficult. It's challenging. It's challenging. It's draining at times. Being in those spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely
Mm.
relate.
Yes,
Um,
yeah.
Now I've come to believe that there are really only two things that will cause a man to want to change and begin this, what I'll call journey of transformation.
Mm.
And those two things are one is pain, and the
Mm.
other is what I call divine discontent, which is just an inner feeling that something's just not right, right? We just
Mm.
intuitively know something's not right with our lives. So I'm
Mm.
curious, when you began your journey, was it because of pain or was it because of that divine discontent?
I guess it was the divine discontent but also mixed with pain because I was 23 when I was introduced to men's work to a different organization called the Mankind Project. So I then did my weekend when I was 23. I'm 42 now, 42 years old now. So, but I always knew that there's something out there bigger and what I wanted to be a part of. So I was always curious, um, and hence me knocking on that door and taking that step. But wanting more and wanting more, a deeper meaning into what I was exposed to of the way men looked like and the way men behaved. And coming where I come from, growing up in a colored community in 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 South Africa. And I guess I mean I'm also aware that colored means different, something different to you guys in the States, you know. So yeah, I guess for me it was also like wanting something healthy, wanting something authentic. Because I always thought there was like I always felt a lot. I always felt a lot of feelings. Also, I guess coming with an addiction background, um, and being a recovering addict, um, stopping like getting clean and getting sober, and then getting involved in the 12-step stuff, but wanting something more, wanting something bigger, and hence there was that curiosity of a different path of a space where I could just be authentic and talk about my feelings with other men in a good way, in a healthy way. Yeah. So yeah, you know.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious, how were you introduced to them? How did you learn about the Mankind Project?
Um, so a my sponsor, my 12-tip sponsor, he he went on, he did the weekend and he was like, there's this thing that I did and I think you benefit from it. And you know, I guess I didn't like question it a lot. And he was like, well, he didn't really give me a lot of answers to it. And he just said, go on and do this weekend. And he didn't tell me much about what happens there. And I trusted him and I went and I did it. And I did it in 2005. I did my MKP and WTA weekend. Yeah, yeah.
Nice. Now, for
Mm.
those of you who are watching, I've spoken about the Mankind Project before, but let me
Mm.
kind of clarify what it is. So, the Mankind Project has a event called the New Warrior Training Adventure. And the New Warrior Training Adventure is a 3-day weekend, if you will, of men coming together to really examine what it means to be a man. And it is by far one of the most powerful, transformative things I've ever done.
Mm.
I did my weekend in 2002. And when I did my weekend, I was actually the only man of color on the premises. There were no staff, there were no other participants that were black. I was the only black guy in the room. But that wasn't an issue for me because I was there to do my work. I was ready to be
Mm.
transformed. So it was really powerful. So one of the things that I promote on this podcast is specifically for Black men to be willing to engage in these types of programs. There are lots of programs out there, but the Mankind Project is one that to me is specifically designed
Mm.
to support men in changing their mindsets about masculinity. And so I highly recommend if you're watching this and you're thinking about what can I do? Well, the Mankind Project is a great way to begin that process of transformation if you're new to this work. Now,
Mm,
we also have called a program called the Brotherhood of Kings, which is sort of an offshoot of the Mankind Project. So basically, what happened was there were several Black men that we came together and said, let's put together our own training based on the MKP
mhm,
technology, if you will.
yes,
And we created a safe space for brothers to come and be comfortable and to be willing to be vulnerable and to connect with each other. And we had our first
mm,
Men of Color weekend last May, and it was really
awesome.
powerful. It was really powerful. We had Black facilitators, Black
Mm,
staff, and it was just amazing. So once again, if you're watching this and you're thinking about transforming your life, you can go to mkp.org and learn more about the organization. There's also a direct link to the Brotherhood of Kings, which is,
mhm,
I'll say, the Black branch of MKP. But again, it is a really powerful process that can
mm,
support and empower you to transform your life. So, Mervin, I would like to ask, so what was your biggest takeaway from your weekend?
Yo, the biggest takeaway for me was this way of being a man, and what I saw happen on the weekend was like super transformational. Um, I think there's a thing called the hero's journey, and when men went and they did the hero's journey and they came back, that for me was profound. That change was just like mind blowing. Without giving away what happened on the weekend. Um, yeah, I for me, I think the biggest one would be men loving on men. Yeah, I never experienced that. So
Yeah,
that was like speaking a different language for me and learning to speak a different language. So that was profound. That was super profound. But also I was super aware that, and I also for me, there was a few black men on that weekend, but on my weekend. But what I told myself was, instead of me living in the problem, I'm going to live in the solution. I'm going to bring in more black men, and that's what I did. I brought in more black men. Um, and it's definitely, I mean, the last weekend we did an MKP weekend, we had 80% black men and
wow.
20% white men. You know what I mean? And that's historical for us in Johannesburg. So yeah, definitely
Yeah, that's beautiful.
a lot
Now,
of
for
work. Yeah.
for me, my biggest takeaway was the fact that I didn't recognize this, but deep down inside, I really didn't trust men before the weekend. And I had done workshops with men and um, facilitated them and participated in them, but I didn't realize just how disconnected I felt from men. Because I think a part of it was I've always been comfortable expressing how I feel, right?
Mm.
I know a lot of men aren't comfortable talking about feelings and emotions. And I know that I had kind of shut out black men because they didn't want to talk about emotions. I was
Oh,
accused of trying to be white because I was talking about how I felt. So I kind of
same here. I know that feeling. Yeah, completely.
so but when I went through the weekend, I realized, okay, there's a lot of men out there that are ready to have these conversations. And what I really wanted to do, like yourself, was to engage more black men in these conversations to help us become more comfortable talking about things like this. So again, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, so that we have, more black men being exposed to black men who are doing this work. And so with that being said, I'm curious. So I want you to think about your intimate relationships with others, right? How did your relationships change, or did they change after you went through the MKP weekend?
Mm. I I think a big profound one would be because I guess for me it was always like my family needs to be a certain way. My family needs to change. My dad needs to do this, and my mom needs to do this. But I think what was profound for me was, instead of the expectation of them or wanting them to change. I needed to change, and I needed to almost show up differently. And what that looks like is small things like even saying I love you to my mom was I had to practice that. I had to because I didn't grow up with that stuff. You know, I didn't grow up with lots of affection. But the conscious choice was that I need to I need to come to those relationships differently. I need to step up differently in those relationships. So consciously, um, and even today with my mom, she, after every conversation, it's like, I love you. But also, I needed to like flex that muscle and start that muscle memory and do that in the relationship as well. I mean, my dad did an NWTA as well. He went through a couple of years ago, and what I realized was that the whole because and even in recovery, I wanted them to be a certain way with me, but I guess I'm responsible for those relationships and how I show up instead of expecting or having these expectations that people should treat me a certain way or it should be with me a certain way. No, um, I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible for the way I want my world to look and how I want to be treated in the world. So I guess it boils down to that having a mission and a vision and living by that and being accountable to the way I show up in the world. So yes, the weekend has definitely transformed those relationships a lot.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
completely. I mean, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the most powerful aspects of the training, actually any transformational program, I think should point to this, which is being 100% responsible for your life turning out the way you want it to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Too many
mm-hmm,
times, we want to blame society, we want
mm,
to blame our parents, blame our
mm,
ex-wives,
mm,
we want to place
mm,
blame, but
mm,
being responsible, that's one of
mm,
the real gifts of doing this
mm,
training is
mm,
holding yourself accountable for how your
mm,
life is right now.
mm,
And that's
mm,
a really powerful, powerful place to be
mm,
when you stand
mm,
100% responsible for your life
mm,
turning out the way you want it to.
mm, mm. Because I think that was the thing. Because for me, it was always like blaming everyone. Oh, I am the way I am because I grew up in an abusive home. Or these stories, there was always these stories and these excuses of this is why I am like that, and always pointing fingers and not like really being accountable and taking responsibility for my life. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a powerful, powerful
Mm,
place to be.
mm, mm, mm.
So let's talk about holding space. First of all, I want you to share what the heck does that mean, holding space, and also talk about your organization. We're going to dive into that. But first of all, explain to the audience what does holding space mean for you?
So I guess how it originally started was I was always so for me it was always like okay, I've worked in a dual diagnosis ward. I've worked in rehabs, 12-step rehabs. I've done all of these things, right? Um, and I've reached the bar in those institutions. What's next? What is next? And I've always gotten so much fulfillment in staffing MKP weekends and being with men. And I was always curious, sorry, how to expand this and kind of turn it into something. So for me, it was always like, how am I going to find men? Where do I get men? Um, and then I bumped into an artist in Johannesburg. He's quite famous, visual artist, and his work spoke about toxic masculinity. And I then reached out to him, and then we had rapport immediately. We had rapport, and And then he was like, well, when do you want to do this? And he's got a big following. And and then he was like, when do you want to do this? Well, I was like, well, let's do this in a month's time. He was like, no, why don't we do it this week? And he actually named it Holding Space. It was called Holding Space Project, and now we're Holding Space Circles. Um, and the first night we launched it, we had 50 men, come out, and predominantly 80%, or actually 90% were black men that came. Um, to the first night we when we launched it, and yeah, man, for me it was always about creating spaces for men, but also Johannesburg particularly, and maybe like South Africa, Greater South Africa is we're in a pandemic where particularly black men, black and brown men are taking their lives. And for me, it was like, and I'm a my brother took his own life as well. So for me, it was like, again, like, how do I turn this pain into my power, right? Um, and creating spaces for men. So then holding space gave birth. Um, and it's me and another guy called Kevin Radham, and we facilitate the space. He's also an MKP man as well. And but I guess for me, MKP was very private, very hidden kind of stuff. And how do we bring this into the light where it's more in the forefront, for men to see, and for it to be easy accessible for men as well, So that was the intention, just to create safe spaces for men. But now we're kind of morphing into corporations, as to working with corporations and getting men's work into corporations as well. Stuff like GBV is quite high in this country. Um, so how do we allies for women as well? Um, I've got two daughters, and how do I create a world for my daughters to be safe? We live in a country where um, women get raped all the time, So I guess, how do I create a world where men are safe, where men are safe for other men, but also for us to do our work as men, so women and kids can be safe, So yeah, and it's not only just in South Africa. For me, it's about like this thing, the work we do becoming international, you know. And we also offer a course, a 6-week course that we take men through. Men pay for that now, because we realized, men weren't paying in the beginning. It was just a free space, and it was like, okay, so how do we then monetize this? So this is what we offer now. We've formalized a course, and we take men through that. Um, but for me at the moment, we're just operating in the northern suburbs. But I don't want it to just be a northern sub. The intention is not that it's just a northern suburbs thing. That we take it out to the townships, to the ghettos, to where the work needs to go. So yeah, there's a lot of noise in the background and stuff we're working on. So the work can go where it needs to go to, um, not only for middle class men, um, but for all of us, where it's inclusive. That regardless of where you come from, that this is accessible to you. So that's the intention of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So with holding space, I think one of the most important aspects of men's work, for men, is to understand and embrace vulnerability.
Mm, mm,
Because as men, we're taught that we're supposed to be tough. We're not supposed to
mm,
feel, So I want to dive into that just a little bit. So
mm,
how important is male vulnerability? And number one, the recovery process,
mm.
because you work with a lot of men in that. And why do you believe creating these spaces, these holding spaces for men is so important?
Well, my judgment of that will become dangerous. I become dangerous where if I'm just bottling up my stuff, I'm bottling up my stuff, I'm bottling up my stuff. What happens to me? Either then it leads into drug addiction, it leads into abuse. It leads into verbal abuse. So where do I take this? And having a safe container and a safe space, we talk about a container where men can come and build a container together and feel safe enough to express themselves. Because it's important for us to express ourselves and not to, suppress. It needs to be suppressed. It needs to be suppressed. So, I mean, in this country, we've got a big uh, 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 alcoholism is rife, because that becomes a release, or acting out sexually becomes a release of that stuff. So it's important for us to sit as men in a circle and just to, put some ground rules together that, whatever is said here stays here, stuff like that, that nothing gets repeated, that when we talk for ourselves. We use I statements. We take responsibility for what we say as men, and it's respect, and it's all respecting where, and we don't give no one advice in the space, unless a man asks for advice. Um, my belief is, you've been living with yourself for so long. Who am I to tell you how to live your life? You know how to live your life. Um, and all we're doing is just providing a safe space for you to be authentic and be your authentic self and to express the way you feel, without bottling it up, and that it coming out sideways and impacting other people, innocent people. It's usually people that we love. I know that as well. From using drugs and getting high. I don't know how to express. I didn't know how to express my feelings. I've been suicidal as well. I've been suicidal a few times, where it's like, what's the point of all this? And that loneliness that comes with, and kind of feeling like a burden to the world. And it's like, well, it's better if I just go. But that's the thing for holding space. It's like no man needs to be alone. No man needs to be alone. There's a space for you. There's room for you. um, we love you. We accept you for who you are. It's a space where we don't judge you for, what you've done. Um, we just there to hold you. We just there to create space for you. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is my belief, first and foremost, that the three most difficult words for any man to say is "I need help."
Hmm. Hmm.
And it is
Hmm.
our unwillingness
Hmm.
to say those three words
Hmm.
that leads to, as you mentioned, violence, alcoholism,
Hmm.
drug addiction,
Hmm. Hmm.
feeling disconnected, because we're too
Hmm.
afraid to simply say, "I
Hmm.
need help."
Hmm.
And vulnerability says it's okay to say, "I need help."
Hmm.
It's okay to reach out to brothers, to have support, because
Hmm.
I remember when I went through my divorce, I didn't know anything about reaching out for support. I didn't know anything
Hmm.
about, vulnerability. I knew I was in a really dark place. I needed help. And fortunately, I didn't drink or do drugs. I probably would have been dead a long time ago. But there was a part of me that intuitively knew that I needed to get help. I just
Hmm.
I was in
Hmm.
such a dark place. And so I gained the courage to go to therapy. And it was in going to therapy, which was the first step that I took in my own growth and transformation, just gaining the courage just to go to therapy and say, "Hey, look, I need help." Now,
Hmm.
I have to share this story, because I know there's such a stigma around therapy for men, and I want to destigmatize going to
Hmm.
therapy because there's no shame in going to therapy. Going to
Not at
therapy
all.
is a sign of strength, not a sign
Hmm.
of weakness. So if you're
Hmm.
watching this, don't feel ashamed. Therapies can be very transformational. But
Hmm.
for me, I'll never forget, because when I decided that I wanted to go to therapy, one of the reasons was I was sitting up late one night and I saw this commercial about depression.
Hmm.
And as I watched that commercial, I recognized that I had all those symptoms. But I didn't recognize that I was depressed at the time. I didn't
Hmm.
know what depression was. But when I
Hmm.
saw that commercial,
Hmm.
I went, "Ooh, that's me." And
Hmm.
so I gained the courage to go to therapy. And one of the
Hmm.
challenges of going to therapy is, first and
Hmm.
foremost, how do you find a therapist? I mean, that was the hardest part. And I
Hmm.
couldn't
Hmm.
figure out.
mm,
Because, all
mm,
these thoughts ran through my mind like, do I need a male therapist or do I need a female
mm,
therapist? Does she have to be black? Does he need to be black? Or can, all
mm,
these questions is just
mm,
going in my head. So for me, what I did, and this tells you how long ago it's been. So I'm sitting at home and I've got a yellow page phone book, right? And I have it sitting on a table. And I go to therapist and I just did like this. I put my oh my and I did like this.
boom.
And I just chose a therapist randomly.
Okay.
But guess what? She turned out to be the perfect therapist.
Beautiful.
It
Beautiful.
happened. It happened to be a white woman.
Mm,
She
mm,
was absolutely perfect. And this is why I know the universe is perfect because
mm,
the way I found her and how perfect she was for me, I know that it was divine. I know that, there
mm,
was the universe orchestrated all of that because I needed
mm,
it. And it put the perfect person in front of me. So
mhm,
as you're watching this, if one of the questions you have is, how do I choose the therapist? I don't know if there's a specific way, but what you can do is simply do some research.
mhm,
The
mhm,
good news today is that online you can find just about anything. So
mhm, mhm,
there are specific programs for Black men, for therapists. I mean, there's
mhm,
there's no excuse not to, right? So we just have
mhm,
to be willing to engage in the process of healing. And
mhm,
that's really what we're talking about. So Mervin, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about that healing because for me, I possibly had the worst childhood you could imagine. Every imaginable type of abuse I experienced
mm,
between the ages of 6 and 13. I mean, it was horrible.
mm,
And again, it wasn't until I went to therapy that I learned how that
mm,
trauma from my childhood was still impacting my life as an adult.
mm,
And I needed to be willing to deal with and heal that
mm,
trauma. So, can you talk a little bit about how we move through and have to heal those traumas?
mm. Yeah, I empathize. I empathize because for me, yeah, a lot of my stuff started there. Um, a lot of my wounds start in childhood. Um, and I guess part of that is like doing that little boy work, right? Working with my little boy, my inner wounded little boy, because um part of my story is that I struggled at school a lot, and I guess society told me that there's something wrong with me. I felt like for a long time there's something wrong with me. I'm stupid. I'm not like the other kids. There's something wrong with me. And then I carried a lot of that stuff into my adulthood, my adult life. Um, yeah, and that pain of not feeling good enough, right? And I guess with the drugs, when I found the drugs and the alcohol, it kind of gave me that relief of I can breathe a bit, you know. And I remember getting hiding as a kid for not being able to do certain mathematics as a kid. And the belief was, and the belief I took on as a little boy was there's something wrong with me. And I'm alone in this world and no one gets me. And um, and I had to do a lot of that work of, and also I can relate. I had a white therapist, an older lady, and she was very kind and very gentle with me around that. She would do a beautiful things. We'd go to the library together and we'd get books for kids, and we'd read, and she'd read books to me, and because of my dyslexia, um, and I'd read with her, and she'd help me read as well because I struggled with reading. But she was very gentle and very kind with me, and I guess that's what I needed as a little boy was kindness, love, um, someone to be patient with me, um, and not feel like there was something wrong with me. So yeah, that inner work, and I had to heal that wound. And through men's work, therapy, I got to, like just do a lot of visualization work as well. Just like, sitting, like putting my little boy in my lap, that 6-year-old that felt that there's something wrong with him. I had to look at him in the eye and say to him, me as a 42-year-old man, I'm here, and I love you, and there's nothing wrong with you, and you're safe. And I think that's was the one thing that I didn't feel was feeling safe as a kid. Didn't feel safe at all. Um, and be very, very gentle and be very mindful of that part of myself. Um, yeah, it's almost like um, that wound, because that wound will always be there, right? But the more I do the work, I squeeze it out, I clean the wound out, and it becomes smaller. But the scar will always remain there. The scar will always remain there, right? But also that in my adult life, it doesn't trip me up because
Yeah.
there's this other part of me where I can go, well, I'm stupid, I'm not good enough. I shouldn't, then I'm not going to do anything, right? Then I'm not going to take responsibility. Then I'm not going to show up. And then I'm going to sit in, I mean, at my last job, I sat with people, and I don't have a degree. I sat with people that got degrees, that went to university, psychiatrists, psychologists, occupational therapists. And I've just got, a high school, not even a high school certificate because I didn't even complete high school. Um, and and when I started there the first year and working there with them was like so intimidating. And that story would play in my head a lot. Are they gonna see that you're stupid? They're gonna see you stupid. They're gonna see through you. And I needed to do a lot of work around that, is to contain that little boy and kind of have, be kind to myself and tell myself that I deserve to be at the table. I deserve to sit there in a ward round with all these people and have a point of view and have a perspective and have a voice. Because what I say is important. Because I've got lived experience of being an addict and working in dual diagnosis. You know?
Yeah.
So,
And that's,
but it took a while. It took a while. It took a while for
yeah.
that voice, and to claim space and to stand in my power. But it's because of the work that I could sit at the table and even sitting in this podcast. I deserve to be on this podcast. And not in an arrogant way.
No, absolutely. No, 100% agree. That's why I've got you on here because I think, especially for men of color, I think it's important that we understand and recognize that childhood trauma, if we don't heal it, it will come back and sabotage our lives in unconscious ways. And I love how you talked about that little boy inside of you. And it is that little boy that's longing to be loved, that's longing to be supported, to feel safe. And again, I think this is something that we as Black men need to talk about more often, uh, because that healing process, that's the key to happiness. We try to find it in sex and money and stuff, but it's that getting to that healing part of ourselves where we get to the point where we can say, I love me just for me.
Mm,
That self that self-love
mm,
place is where we want to end up. And like I
mm,
said, we don't have to have PhDs, degrees. I don't have a degree either. Like yourself, I didn't even complete high school. I got a GED. And
mm,
yet I've written 16 books, and like yourself, I've coached PhDs, and so
mm,
I know exactly where you're coming from because what's in my heart is to
mm,
help people, to
mm,
support people, and I have a lot to say. That's why I write books.
mm,
But I want Black men to know and be comfortable not knowing, not knowing that, okay, so what are these guys talking about? Healing and inner
mm,
child work, but that's what this
mm,
conversation is about. I want to introduce men to these ideas so that we have the emotional
mm,
vocabulary to communicate with each other, to
mm,
talk about our
mm,
pain, talk about our healing, and talk about our
mm,
joys. that's what I'm committed to doing. And that's why I love having people like yourself on this podcast to support us in having these types of conversations.
Mm.
Now, but I am curious because healing to me doesn't have a final destination. It's a journey. We're constantly on this journey of growing and healing.
Yeah.
So how do you maintain your own well-being and sobriety actually while
Mm.
helping others?
Well, I guess that's the important part is I need to look after myself, right? You can't, um, yeah, my cup needs to be full. Um, I mean, I guess over the years I had to learn the hard way because I've been in spaces where I was burnt out, but I'd still go on, and I wouldn't look after myself at all. And it's still a struggle. It's still a challenge, stuff like walking, that helps me, just some exercise helps. Going to 12-step meetings, that stuff helps. Talking to my mentor and stuff, because again, like you said, the work never stops, right? Um, but I need to, because it's also easy to kind of. I think for a long time it was like I get lost in other people's lives and their stuff, and then I just not look after myself. Because also, like, I want to avoid me. Part of my part of my illness, part of my addiction is avoidance, right? It's sort of avoid me. So I'd rather look at everybody else's stuff and not my own stuff, and it almost gave me like some sort of like grandiose God complex of, yeah, look at me, super unhealthy, super unhealthy, um, and arrogant as well. So part of that is going to 12-step meetings and staying humble, staying on my knees, asking my higher power for my higher power's guidance on a daily basis. And I think like the big one, I like what you said earlier in the conversation is asking for help. Because sometimes I think for me that's the big one is I kind of go, oh, I've been sober for 19 years. I'm okay. I'm good. But that's dangerous. That's super dangerous. You that I just I've got to humble myself and ask for help. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help at all. You
Absolutely.
know. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, as we wind down, I want to talk about the importance of community,
Mm,
brotherhood. Because I know
mm,
a lot of us as men, we're isolated and alone, and we tend to be lone wolves, and we try
yeah.
to do everything on our own. So can you talk about the importance of community and brotherhood?
Wow. Mm. I think that's the one thing that keeps me going is community and brotherhood. I mean, I've been in men, and so also another thing is I go to an I group as well, and that's part of MKP, and doing my work. And I've been with those men for years. I've been with those men for like over 10 years. I've been with those men. So I know those men and those men, um, and I trust those men. So I think definitely community for me is important because I'm not an island. I can't do this thing alone. I need you. You know, Mandela spoke about Ubuntu. And for me, it's about Ubuntu. Ubuntu is about that community, and just I mean, having elders around them and the elderly wisdom that they have. Um, Yeah, I think, and even for me, that recovery community is important as well. Although sometimes these days I feel disconnected from that community, because I'm not really that engaged in that community as I was. But I know that feeling of being immersed in a community and being a part of, and the importance of that. And I feel like that with holding space, there's that community that no man should be alone because that's important for me. It feeds my soul. Um, and just loving on each other, that's the important part. of it. That keeps me going. Yeah, that stuff's super important to me. Yeah,
Absolutely. We have to,
brotherhood.
yeah, you can't do this by yourself.
Mm. No.
You can't do this because you need, number one, the support, but also the reflection to help you see things you can't see, maybe.
Hmm. Hmm.
Also, the accountability piece, having that
Hmm.
community
Hmm.
that can hold you accountable for your
Yeah,
commitments and the things
definitely,
that you say you want to
definitely.
do. So it's
Hmm.
important to have community. So I hope that if nothing else, you find a community of like-minded men who will support and empower you to become your best self, because that's ultimately what we want to do. We want to become our best.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's difficult, but it's possible. Mervin and I are perfect examples of what's possible. We don't claim to be perfect, but we are on point, on mission, fulfilled, doing our work and enjoying life. And I think that's what we all want. So Mervin, how can people find out more about you and holding space, and where can they go to learn more?
So yeah, we've got the Instagram. It's called the Holding Space Project on Instagram, so they can check that out. Find us there, um, and also on our website, the Holding Space Circles,
And
and then
I'll
also
connect it,
the Instagram as well.
and I'll have links below this video also so that you
Yeah,
can click onto it.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so now, Mervin, I want to give you an opportunity for your closing comments, whatever you feel on your heart to share.
Mm. I mean, the one thing that comes to me is that no man should be alone. I think that's what I'm taking from this conversation. That would be my takeaway. So my takeaway would be there is help. There are spaces for you wherever you are. All of you is welcome, um, and you don't have to be alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. Well, man, I just want to say thank you for shattering the stereotypes, for really being an
Thank
advocate
you.
for men, for empowering men of color around the globe. And I'm honored to have you in this space, to be a partner with you, because that's what it
Mm.
takes. It takes all of us coming together to support and empower each other. So again, I just
Mm.
want to say thank you for joining me on the podcast and for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
All right. So this has been another episode of Shatter the Stereotypes. And I want to leave this with you, as Mervin just said. No man is an island. You
Mm.
can't do this by yourself. Find a support system, find a community that supports and empowers you to become the best version of yourself. We'll see you next episode. Take care.
Thank you.